Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Blacklist. So in this episode, I love how we ended up coming up with this blacklist for this episode. Usually, it's like a long series of things that obviously lead to Reddington being like, oh yeah, here's this blacklister. But it's like, nope, like, it was kind of on the spur of the moment because Cooper's kind of pissed that basically everything's kind of been playing towards Reddington's point of view. I mean, it's something that's kind of like, it's always been bubbling on the surface, but it's really gotten a lot worse lately because Reddington, in his eyes, is like, because he brought it up before that all he wanted was like, he thought, obviously he doesn't trust Reddington. Reddington's a criminal, but to him it's kind of an ends justify the means type of thing where it's like, yes, Reddington's a criminal, but the fact is he helps put away very, very bad criminals. So it's like, it kind of balances itself out in some way. Some moral way, it kind of makes it slightly okay. But lately, it's always been something about Reddington's situation, helping him fix some kind of problem that's going on within his own criminal organization or something that's happened to screw him over. It's like, we're here to remedy your problem rather than going out there and making sure the world's a better place. And yes, sometimes those lines blur, but the sad thing is that at the end of the day, we're saving the world, but at the same time, we're helping you because we're only helping save the world or making the world a better place because you need us to help you do it because it'll benefit you in some shape or form. I mean, he even rips into Red later on because Red's like, oh, the reason why you're acting like this, you've kind of been on edge lately, is because your daughter's sick. But he's like, I get your concern, but my daughter's none of your damn business. He's like, you know what the difference between us, like, you want to know why so many people who betray you, like, you know, do that? So many people close to you betray you. It's because really, at the end of the day, you have no one who loves you. There's no one to love because the fact is, even when you try to do something good for someone, there's always a selfish side of it for you. You don't know how to not be selfish. You don't know how to go about things. Try and just do something for the sake of other people. You know, because playing devil's advocate, you could be like, oh, the only reason why he got Liz her job back was because it made it easier for him because he needed Liz to be back there to kind of push things, like to kind of be his liaison to kind of help things go smoother with the task force. Is what you can arguably say. I mean, because truth be told is he wanted nothing to do with the task force when he thought Liz had died. So obviously, like, if it wasn't for Liz, he wouldn't care about the task force, even though the task force does a good job. Even Cooper has to worry about, like, higher ups being like, yo, maybe we should take care of this task force situation, get rid of it because it's not working out, because it's like Reddington's more harm than, like, lately his harm, like, his harm outweighs his good is what I'm trying to say. I don't know why I stumbled around that so hard. But he was just on the spot. He was just kind of thinking for a second. He's like, oh, the architect. He literally pulled the name out of his head. It's like, because usually he's able to give them a little bit more for information, but it's kind of like, it's just kind of a blacklister he's familiar with. It's a name he's familiar with, but it's not something he really readily had enough. Like, he kind of brings these names to them because it's like, oh, some time has gone by. He's obviously looked into this criminal a little bit more. The architect's probably a name he's heard some stuff here and there, obviously knows some of the things he's behind, but it's like what he's 100% up to. It's like, well, that's something the task force ended up having to figure out. In particular, Aram, and he had to basically go undercover. At first, he's like, wait, what are you? No, I can't go undercover. It's like, oh, you do fine. You did fine last time. It's like, oh, you mean the time my girlfriend kicked my ass like super hard? Well, my now ex-girlfriend, but at the time fake girlfriend, who was just getting close to me for information, kicked my ass, and then I had to scream the safe word for you guys to come in and save me, like a baby that needed to be changed. It's like, yeah, it went well. I did a little side note thing, you know, I always gotta do my little actor thing. There's the actor who played the architect in this episode is played by Brett Spinner. Obviously, he's been in so many things. Like, I've seen him here and there throughout a lot of stuff. But I think the most recent thing I can place him in is, if you've ever seen the show Outcast, he's Sydney from Outcast. If you never watched Outcast, I highly recommend you watch. I like it. I don't know if you'll like it, but I highly recommend you check it out. Just kind of throwing that in there. But nevertheless, essentially the architect is kind of the person who's like, oh, I create this perfect plan that basically, if the money's right, I create this perfect plan and I execute it. That's kind of what, hence the name. But like I said, it was just kind of an interesting way that Blacklister was recommended. It was just kind of like off the top of his head, like, oh yeah, the architect. And they deal with him. And so it turns out that basically the architect's plan, obviously he needed a group of hackers, which is connected to a group known as Black Mass 13. Aram goes undercover there, and he ends up bumping into Elise, his ex-fake girlfriend. It's like, I guess that's why they kind of brought her up in the conversation. It's because they kind of foreshadow the fact that he'd run into her again. And he's like, because at first he sees her and I'm like, huh, That's interesting. I was like, oh, does he recognize that lady here? And the way he was talking to her and everything, I was like, oh, that's her, because she looks so different. Because originally she had blonde hair, but now she's a brunette. Because obviously it's probably just, well, I mean, mainly the reason why she's out of jail right now is mainly because it's like, well, there's so many agencies because she's so good at her job. There's like so many agencies are like, oh, give us, wanting to like pardon her a little bit. In this particular case, she's working for the NSA, getting them some intel that, and then he's just like, really, like you're like, why are you here? Type of thing. So it's like, because you should be locked up, but because I love it periodically. Well, I'll get to that eventually, but it's like, yeah, I forget that she's actually is pretty trained, because it's like she ends up kicking that dude's ass pretty hard, and Aram helping out by landing the final blow with the fire extinguisher. But basically, it was part of a competition. Aram ended up winning it and ended up getting the attention of the architect. And it was basically like, hey, we'll because he needed his help with because basically the architect's plan was basically he's being hired by essentially a leader of like a white nationalist group. Basically, he was in prison, he was on death row, and he needed help getting out, and Aram was going to be the key to that, because basically that's what the whole competition was about, tracking down this black Mass 13, find out who does the best job in the competition, and then get that person to help him with the whole situation. But when it came down to it, Aram wouldn't back down. He basically was like, I know who you are. You might not know who I am, but I know who you are. And it's like, I'm not going to help. He's like, ooh, look at you, Aram. Like, because the reason why he stuck around, because even Elise, well, we know her real name's Janet, was like, you should come with me. And he's like, I'm not going anywhere. Because the fact there's a lot of innocent people back here. And it's like, good guy Aram is willing to stay behind and help. It's like, obviously he's not a well-trained agent and stuff like that. But it's still like, no, he knows like the right between what's right and wrong. It's like, let me get in contact with my friend, like, with the task force, and try to get back up here, because there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of guns, a lot of people could get hurt. So, and I love when Samara first runs into Janet after like Aram is taken by the architect. She's like, yeah, Aram was here, and then they see Janet, she pulls out her gun immediately and is about ready to point her, and she's like, oh, and ends up finding out that she's kind of being like, she's under a whole system with the NSA. So, and it even comes up later on. It's like, oh yeah, we're getting help from Janet Sutherland too. And then Samara's like, that bitch. And she's like, and then Cooper's like, yeah, she's right here. She's like, hey Samara. It's just like, I love it. Just kind of, it's like, because more so than anything, she doesn't like her because she played with Aram's heart, because Aram really cared for her and everything. It was like she was just manipulating and using him. He's a very caring person. He opened his heart to her, and she just stomped all over it. So it's like, how dare you hurt someone I care about? I mean, plus like that's her boyfriend. I mean, even came up in conversation. She's like, oh yeah, when your girlfriend tried to arrest me, she's like, she's not my girlfriend. She's totally your girlfriend. I mean, at the same time, it's like, why bother putting labels on everything? But it's just, I just thought it was just kind of cute the way she acted and everything. Because for Aram, it meant a lot. And he even asked her at one point, he's like, did it mean anything to you? She's like, it wasn't personal. He's like, the fact is we slept together and everything, I opened up my heart to you, it was pretty personal. But then eventually she did apologize. So she's like, I am sorry about, everything that kind of playing out the way they did. I mean, luckily, in a way she did save him, because he used the information on her glasses that she had plugged into the computer when the architect was trying to enact his plan, and it basically put out a signal that let them know exactly where Aram was. There was kind of a situation where, like, because it was kind of an interesting thing too, where it's like, the fact is that, you had Reddington being like, it's kind of reckless that Cooper just went along with this mission like he did, because like I said, more often than not, they at least go in with the information that they've acquired from Reddington, but Reddington didn't have any on the spot, because it's just the name he pulled out of his hat, because Cooper wanted one so badly. But you could argue, like, Cooper is just kind of under a lot of stress, because basically things aren't performing well with the task force because of the whole Reddington situation, whether he's really worth it or not. Plus, you find out this whole situation about his daughter being sick and stuff like that. So, but nevertheless, I mean, it worked out in the end. I mean, granted, a couple towers on that prison ended up getting blown up, and a lot of people's lives are in danger. But luckily, everything worked out. I mean, Aram came out with the clutch win in the end, where basically the architect was getting away, and then Aram in his head was like, I can't let more people die, and so he fired the weapon they had there and just blew up the dude's car. which Aram immediately felt bad about afterwards because it's like, oh, we could have used, kept him alive because I did that. He's now dead. We can't, interrogate him for any information about anything, any crimes he was associated with, any of the people that, because in this particular case, he busted a guy out. It's like maybe there were similar circumstances where he helped out other bad people, could have learned their names from him, all the victims of crimes he's been associated with. But, Samar tries to make him feel better, but no, you did the right thing under the circumstance, because he would have who's to say he even wouldn't have gotten away. And then, especially because at that point, because also Aram, it would have gotten found out eventually, but because at that point Aram was the only one that really saw his face. So, but because Aram would probably be able to, piece it together, figure out who he really was and stuff like that. That is something too. No, because you never actually ever found out the architect's real name or even found out anything about him in this episode. That was kind of interesting. It happens with some blacklisters, but it doesn't happen that often. More often than not, when it comes to a blacklister, usually they have a title, but obviously you get to know their personal names. Even amongst the harem, you got to know each member of the harem's name, for example. So that's just I'm going on that matter. So, like I said, that's kind of interesting. It was nice seeing Aram kind of being undercover again, this time for a longer period of time. But the other side of this episode was the fact is that Reddington interrogated Isabella Stone. Isabella was kind of pissed at him because she blamed Reddington for her husband's death. And then Reddington finally breaks it. I figured the way he was talking, eventually he was going to break the news to her. I was like, there's no way he actually killed your husband. And it turns out, no, he didn't. He's like, your husband's not dead. Your husband, at the end of the day, the only thing he cared about, he's a very good money manager guy. But the fact of the matter is, the only thing he ever cared about, the only time he ever spent his time thinking about was you and your children. So, to make sure that you are all okay and well taken care of and never have to be dragged in all of this, he faked his own death. Reddington made him disappear. And so, because it's he's actually off married somewhere else, but Reddington's I'm not actually going to tell you where he is because I don't want him to see you. Because if he sees you the way you are now, it's going to break his heart because he had this perfect image. Because the whole point of it all was to protect her innocence. And it's that innocence is gone with all the things that she's done. Yes, she's taken down possibly bad people. Really, it's not even a situation of always taking down bad people. It's a situation, in Reddington's case, it's kind of in her mind, that was kind of it was even more personal for her because it's because I didn't realize it was personal for her. It seems like more so than anything, it was just, she was hired for it, but there was a personal angle to it too. And there's all these people that she ended up killing, people that she even attempted, what was his name, Justin, last episode, the guy she was trying to kill, he received money from Reddington. He never did anything with it. So you're going to kill some innocent, dude for just receiving money from Reddington. Reddington never asked him to do anything with it, on his behalf or anything like that. So it's kind of a situation where it's oh, you have this perfect image of a girl, and then it's oh, she's such an angel in your mind, and you find out holy crap, she has a bad personality, and kind of she turns into a devil in front of your eyes. It's kind of a similar circumstance. It's she would have went from an angel to a devil in his eyes because it's oh, you were this sweet, innocent woman I was in love with, and now I see that you've become this. And he's I don't want you, it's not right for your husband to see you like that. He's actually, it's quite ironic, the whole point was to protect her innocence, and in doing so, trying to protect her innocence, he ended up turning her into someone that's not so innocent. So, but it turns out she doesn't know the name of the person who hired. Obviously, it was kind of all kind of transitions and stuff like that. All the information about Reddington's organization was leaked to him. So basically, he had to follow the money. So he basically has his dude, David, kind of look into it. The bank, it's oh, this money came through your bank, so I need you to get this information for him. But it's no, I'm not doing that right now. This dude who's a super famous painter that very rarely ever goes out of his way to paint people, I finally got him in a situation where he was going to paint me. Now, his paintings are the very few that he do get put up in special places. The places they mentioned kind of went over my head. I'm not familiar with them, but for the way he makes it sound there's some pretty high class places that the paintings that he get put there. He's oh, that could be me completely immortalized as a painting in some proper place. It'd be oh, here's my face essentially. And so he went and helped Reddington. And then Reddington goes to talk to the guy later on, and he kind of starts trying to speak Italian to the guy because that's all he could speak. But, and then Dembe responds to him, and then, Reddington looks at Dembe, he's wait, you speak Italian? He's yeah, there was a girl. He's of course it was. All right, now just Dembe, tell him that, hey, I respect his work. Not all of it. Some of his other work is just kind of low, but I respect his work. I like what he does. The fact of the matter is, I just need his help with doing something. And then Dembe kind of responds with one word, I think, essentially probably the Italian word for ransom or kidnapping is kind of what he was kind of getting at. Basically completely ignoring what Reddington said. Now, to me, I thought of it as that was just freaking hilarious, because you just see Reddington's like, okay, Dembe, whatever. That, or, it was a simple thing of like, Dembe learned a little Italian, and that was only Italian he knew that would fit in the circumstance, so he couldn't say everything that Reddington was trying to say, and he just was like, okay, I just said this one word. So, I mean, whether that's, I'm sure it could go either way, but either way would be funny, and I just appreciate the scene, because I love the back and forth that like Reddington and Dembe have. It's like usually every once in a while, like every couple of episodes, they'll just have that like that conversation that you just love. It's just so good. And then when it came down to it, what I love is kind of a middle finger Reddington gave to David was basically, he was sitting there. He was the guy. He became the artist's muse. That basically the guy would start painting him, and he walks in. He's like, "What the hell is going on?" It's like, "Yeah, the guy. Originally, I was going to just shoot him and threaten to kill him and everything to make it so that he'll help me get to you. But it's like he found out who I am. We got to talking. So now he's so interested in painting me and stuff. And he's like, David's like, "Wait, where's my painting?" He's like, "Yeah, he needed the canvas, immediately. So basically, he used the other side of the one that was meant for David." And so it's just like, oh, just kind of another gut punch. And the fact is that Reddington's like, oh, like the fact is, he's just like, oh, I need a scratch right now. Initially talking about his nuts. At first I was like, is he talking about his nose? But he's like, oh, you can grab him. I was like, is he talking about his? And then he readjusted himself and just like, oh, look, so relief. I was like, he was talking about his nuts. Okay, nice. And then he was like, okay, so what we're going to do is you're going to help me out. And if you don't, I'm going to kill this artist. To make matters worse, to add more salt to the wound, I'll make it so that my painting is the last thing that he does before he dies. So that later it's my picture that's put up somewhere instead of yours, that it'll be the last work that he was killed by the person that he was painting. And so kind of making it kind of like some twisted poetic message. And then David's like, fine, okay, I can do it. Just promise you won't hurt the artist. And he was just like, all right, it all depends on his portrait. So, but then it ends up getting back to him, and it's like, oh, all the money is actually coming from Reddington's own account. His own money has been used to fund his demise. Once again, it didn't get to that point, but it's like, oh, we still got to figure out, it's either someone who's hacked into my accounts or someone who's very familiar with my accounts. Once again, obviously Kate, we haven't seen her for a while. I've already went as extreme as I have been before, but I'm just throwing it out there to anyone that, hey, this might be your first one. I've thrown it out for a while that I figured from the very beginning, like, Kate was going to try and come back at him. I wasn't 100% sure, but with everything that's been happening the past couple episodes, I was like, dude, it's obviously got to be Kate. I screamed it at the top of my lungs last episode. It's definitely Kate behind this, but maybe you'll find out next episode. I do know that next episode is like a 2-hour event. There is one more thing I want to talk about, which kind of ties in with that 2-hour event, I'm sure. But it does make me wonder, is Reddington slowly kind of piecing that together? I mean, because the fact of the matter is, the reason why he doesn't even think Kate, I keep forgetting, like, why won't Kate even come to his mind, is because he thinks Kate's dead. I mean, what will probably happen is he'll decide that, he'll get the feeling, he's like, wait, could it be? And he goes to check out, comes to find out she's still alive. So maybe not. But nevertheless, the other side of this episode I wanted to talk about is the fact is that Tom is looking more into his murder. Like last episode, we ended up finding out that he was possibly murdered. Him as Christopher was murdered. He looked into it a little bit, ended up finding, Liz helped him look into it a little bit too. What's the fact is that we ended up finding out that, obviously the guy that claimed that he murdered Tom when he was a kid is dead. He died in prison. Like basically you ended up finding out that he was sick. Essentially his mom was like, my son was a monster. He deserved to be where he was because of all the nasty and terrible things that he did to people. And it turns out that basically she was paid and given a script to be like, hey, say that he also killed this person. And the list went into such details about exactly how everything was, how the scene was. It was in such great detail that it's like, there's no way he didn't do this to this kid. So, but he was paid to do it. So, because I was wondering, it's like, okay, so what's up with the situation with Tom? And even he's like confused about it. He's like, why would someone pay to have it seem like I died? For what purpose? Is it connected to Susan? Maybe his dad? What would be the reason for that? Like, why would faking a kid's death be so important? And why him specifically? That's kind of the whole big thing. Obviously, Red told him, was like, don't tell your mom the truth because Scotty can't be trusted, because who's to say that she won't just lie to you, but Liz is kind of like, you might not have a choice in the matter. Like, it might be the only way you will be able to find out any information about this, because it's like, tell her that you're her son and then find out that basically, like, that your death was faked and everything, and that you've been alive this entire time. So maybe she'll have some idea of who would have done this, which is what I was kind of saying, because it seems like, because next week, I'm sure, because there's a 2 hour thing, I'm thinking it's kind of, because next week is the same week that the Blacklist Redemption airs as well. So I'm thinking this 2 hour event is kind of like a premiere of that, while also like both, it's probably going to be like a crossover thing where it's like, oh, this episode of Blacklist is crossing over with like this Blacklist Redemption episode pilot, or the premiere, so it's kind of blending together, I'm thinking. I mean, that's how I'm looking at it, at the very least. It's going to be very interesting to see like how that all goes out. Like I brought up before, especially considering who the three main protagonists is, that's definitely going to be interesting. I mean, granted, Solomon started working for Susan, so it's not that weird. But I mean, under the circumstances that Tom kind of left Solomon, I mean, it's interesting enough, especially now that you look back on that, knowing that, oh, Liz is actually alive. So that makes that situation even weirder, because it's like, but I mean, he potentially could put your wife's life in danger. It could have been catastrophic if things hadn't been faked. So, but still, I mean, I'm sure that's more reason to hate him anyway, because it's like, even though she's okay and everything, you had to fake her death and everything, you kind of had to play it up a little bit. It's also because he, doing what he did, potentially put her life in danger. Also kind of have to think about the fact that your mom potentially put her life in danger too. So that's just layer on top of layer. Another thing in this episode too was about Wrestler looking into Wright's murder. She was a lady, I can't remember. I only remember the actress's name. It's either Christina or Christine. Either Christine or Christina Lottie. The lady that's connected to the cabal, that's basically connected to the government. She's got, I forgot what her job position, even Wrestler even brought it up in the episode. But obviously the whole her murder situation, I mean, it's quote unquote a murder because Wrestler knows that she did it. He has never been able to prove it. But we as audience know that she's definitely dead, but to everyone else, it's like, oh, she disappeared. There's no evidence or whatever, and it seems like the case is being closed. Harold's kind of sad about it too because he wants to look for her, but it's like, because even Wrestler's like, there's no way someone in her position would just up and disappear. So, but it seems like he's getting the case files together to kind of go, look more, investigate, doing his own investigation, even though he's supposed to drop it. Liz will be helping him with that in the future, I'm sure, because, they kind of help each other out with situations like that. But it's going to be interesting because we already know that obviously Reddington has a somewhat relationship with the Cabal to a certain extent because he's had dealings with that lady in the past, like subsequently since the whole thing, like especially, she actually popped up this season, didn't she? Yeah, during the whole Alexander Kirk situation, because he brought up the fact is that like this is all her fault. The whole Alexander situation is her fault because she and her people put Liz's real name out there, drawing him out and drawing him towards her. So it was kind of their fault in the first place. It's kind of what he was. It was one of the conversation that it's kind of a prid pro quo type of situation. I don't know why I struggle with that so hard. I think it's just because I think with these things I talk too fast sometimes, and it's just like I'm thinking at the same time I'm trying to speak, and I just kind of get a little cluttered and I kind of slur my words. Not important. Nevertheless, like they kind of have a relationship where they kind of help each other out to a certain extent. It's like, which is like, I said it then and I'm still saying it now. It's like, why would you help her? Like she screwed over Liz so hard because, Liz is one of the few people in the world he wholeheartedly cares about. I mean, obviously Dembe being another one, but at the same time, you could play devil's advocate and be like, well, maybe that might not mean much to Reddington because he killed one of the people that was very close to him. That was one of his closest associates, that being Kate. But at the same time, you saw last episode how he cared about another associate so heavily that he didn't want to leave him to die. But then again, you could be like, oh, maybe that's because he already lost Kate and he didn't want to be in a situation where he felt like he was abandoning or leaving someone else to die or killing someone in a sense. So I guess that's why he specifically didn't do it himself, that he left the gun. But I guess more so he was hoping that the guy would just, defend himself, at least fight in some blaze of glory, not just surrender himself or just kill himself like he did. So Overall, very good episode. A lot of developments, and I'm very, very interested to find out what goes down next week. It's like I said, especially considering that this is all coinciding with the Blacklist Redemption, what that's all going to be about, and what actually goes down in it, and what that means going forward with the Blacklist. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.